Thank you all for attending today's webinar. A few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. You're all muted, but we encourage you to use the chat feature for comments and for our activities, and use the Q&A feature for any questions that you might have. We'll be addressing those questions at the end of our session. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our hosts, Cheryl and Tony.
Thank you all for coming today, and also thank you for your registration questions, which we, of course, are going to answer. I'm Cheryl Last from SkillDirector, and I'm joined by our CEO, Tony Charles.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Welcome. Looking forward to a good conversation today.
Okay, so your job as talent, learning, and development professionals is to ensure that people have the skills they need to both do their job and also grow into new roles. And changes in how people want to learn is creating new opportunities for us to do our jobs well. So today we're going to talk about how to boost employee satisfaction through a modern learning approach that you can deliver. And you'll do this by being learner-focused, driving engagement, and being both forward-looking and curious. Now let's do a quick poll. You should see this pop up. What is your biggest challenge today? So we've got 5 choices here. Is it understanding how I can transform to better serve modern learners, or to stop being an order taker, becoming a trusted advisor to departments of modern learners? Is it, you're spending all your time fighting fires and not having time to think about the modern learners, or influencing your organization to think differently? Which one is your biggest challenge? Okay, good. So this is actually not too surprising. The 2 biggest ones were influencing my organization to think differently about learners, and also understanding how I can transform to better serve modern learners. Becoming a trusted advisor is the 3rd one that got your votes. And again, when we start to talk about how we're going to give you these techniques that are going to help you to address your biggest challenges. So in traditional needs analysis, you ask departmental leaders, where do they think people need to improve? And then you provide the product they request. That's reactive. And you put yourself into a box by saying, you tell me what you need and I'm going to give it to you. That's an order taker. That's someone who fights fires. That's not somebody who is trying to get the organization to think differently or transforming. So we propose that if you start being more proactive, you will overcome your challenges and you will better serve the needs of the modern learner and become more strategic and valuable to your organization. So we're going to start with what the research says a modern learner wants, and then talk about specific things that you can do and traits that you can develop in order to get people where they want and need to go.
Thank you, Cheryl. There's really a lot of research, just a tremendous amount of research from really credible sources like LinkedIn, they have their annual workplace learning report, right? Sources like Josh Bersin, McKinsey and Company, all about what the modern learner wants. And when we look at this particular data from LinkedIn's 2022 workplace learning report that came out a few months ago, employees have 3 motivations to learn that are all connected to careers. And as you can see down below in the first bullet, even managers share that career-focused vision for learning, right? This is the why that we need to tap into when we're serving the needs of modern learners so we can boost their satisfaction. And when we look at some additional data, this particular survey showed that aligning learning to skill gaps is what most people felt would make learning more relevant to their job and their career goals, right? Obviously, the more relevant something is for people, the more they accept it, they agree with it, they use it. So when we have learning recommendations or learning resources that are specifically targeted to their personal skill gaps, that's going to drive their buy-in. You also see 2 really important points on here highlighted. One is, assessments to find out where I need improvement, and the other is providing opportunity to apply what I've learned. And despite the fact that in L&D, right, we've been working for years to make making, I think, really significant efforts to enhance learning opportunities at work. Yet we hear year after year the claim from employees, I just don't have time for learning. That continues to be the #1 voiced complaint every year. But when we look at the next data point here from a Forbes article that came out earlier this year, it really illustrates, I think the gap may be, in fact, in the program themselves. We see that 86% of employees want job training, but only a third feel that what they're being offered actually meets their expectations. And then that statistic mirrors a recent Gallup survey that was published last month, and that's the data on the right, where only a third of US employees, and frankly, a staggering 21% of employees globally, say that they're engaged at work. And this is, I think this is tied to this whole quiet quitters phenomenon we've been hearing about. And I think this is why having the right L&D program is critical to driving employee engagement and satisfaction.
Okay, so let's summarize. The focus for learners is on their careers. If you want to keep them engaged and a part of your organization, think of this as internal mobility. Now, notice the data point here on the bottom about retention being almost 2 times as long for companies that do internal mobility well. Today's learners want activities that are relevant to career goals, easy to consume, quick to consume, self-directed, and personalized to them, not just their role. So we need to tailor their learning accordingly. And we have to deliver a solution that recognizes their lack of time for learning. In other words, people want to learn in their job the way they learn in their personal lives. If you need to change the oil in your car or fix something that's broken, well, that's relevant and personalized to you. So you probably go to YouTube, which is easy to access and quick to consume. And what's more, you apply the learning immediately to fix your problem, which solidifies the learning. So if we want to boost employee satisfaction, we need to do so by meeting our webinar objectives. Be learner-focused through identifying individual needs and skill gaps. Drive engagement through providing modern, personalized learning, including those informal things they can do while they work. Be forward-looking, supporting career planning and growth and targeting internal mobility. And be curious about who they are and what they do. So throughout the rest of this webinar, we're going to try to present each of these in a very consistent way. We're going to describe each, and then we're going to propose things that you can do so that you leave with actionable steps. So let's start with be learner-focused through identifying individual needs and skill gaps. Now, if we are to ensure that people have the skills they need to do their job and grow into new roles, that is, helping them with their career, we need to start with what skills people need to have in order to be successful. That's what's going to force us to be learner-focused. We have to know what tasks and skills that people have to be able to perform, and with what level of proficiency, and what that looks like in terms of the behaviors that they exhibit. That's a role-based competency model. Now, 73% of those who registered for this webinar aren't using them to drive professional development today. So if you don't already have a role-based competency model, or at least a skills of the future model that they can use to ensure that they have skills that transcend jobs, we have recorded webinars, you see here on the left panel, that you can watch with step-by-step instructions and templates you can download. The first one is for building competency models, and the second one is about skills of the future.
All right, great, Cheryl, thanks. And then, like anything else in life, right, to continue this conversation, if you want to get from point A to point B, you need to know where you're now, right? And that's your point A. And then you need to know where your point B is, which is where you want to go, and what the gap is between them. That becomes your gap analysis, and then you can create a plan to close those gaps. If we connect this to one's career, right, a skills assessment against a role-based competency model, as Cheryl was just describing, really enables each person to know where they are today and then where they need to be based on the model's targets. That allows them to identify their skill gaps. What happens when we conduct that gap analysis or that skill gap analysis is that each person becomes self-aware of their own personal skill gaps. And that self-awareness is really a motivator, right? That allows them to take action because they know what those gaps are. If you remember the survey data we showed earlier, a couple of key points. People said they want they're learning to align to their skill gaps, and they want assessments to find out where they need to be to make improvements. Those are top learner requests. When we talk about driving learner engagement, this is the first step, right? It's desire. It's the pull versus push. But 64% of registrants for this webinar aren't using competency assessments focused on development today. And that's a lot, 64%. So the question then becomes, what can we do about it? I think importantly, we need to provide learners with the ability to self-assess against a role-based competency model. And if we have this program, we can then encourage those participants to self-assess against other jobs as part of owning their own career development. But you can't do this unless you have a role-based competency framework.
Now, to execute an assessment strategy, you need to embrace technology. From an end user perspective, if it's not easy, people aren't going to do it. And the strategy of emailing a spreadsheet from person to person can really only get you so far. So it's got to be easy and reasonably fast. We recommend less than 30 minutes because you don't want box checking. If it gets too long, that's what you'll have. You want people to seriously self-assess. You need to make it really easy to get consistent objective data. That's why they need embedded behavioral examples that makes it easy to select their real proficiency level while also providing enough data to inspire people to mastery. So these examples, these behavioral examples, also drive alignment between the various individuals who will assess. Maybe the individual themselves doing a self-assessment, manager, maybe even a subject matter expert. And when that alignment can take place and you've got those shared examples, then they can have data-driven coaching conversations. Now, part of being learner-focused is generating the support that they need, making it easy for managers to be able to drive career goals for their team, which you saw as part of the LinkedIn research. And that means that managers need to be able to view both individual and team data so they can plan team activities, that they can pair task-based mentors and together with mentees for collaborative learning. And it's really hard to create this new modern learning culture without buy-in from the top. There's going to be a tremendous amount of data that's generated. So your technology needs to aggregate and visualize results for leadership, connecting the proficiencies and gaps that are identified with their business objectives, because that's the what's in it for your leaders. So let me give you an example. Let's say that the organization wants to be able to develop 3 new software applications over the next year using some programming language. Now you could tell leaders, okay, we only have 10 people with the target level of proficiency who can do that, but we need an estimated 30. We have 15 people who are close to being proficient. So we can upskill those 15 and hire 5. And here's the plan for doing that. Now, doesn't that sound like the types of conversations you'd want to have with your leaders? So identifying individual needs and skill gaps is both learner-centric and drives the ability for you to be more strategic and valuable to the organization. And this goes back to those challenges that you just told us in the survey and our poll question that you have.
So we're talking here about skills assessment. And of course, we have to ask the question, is skill assessment the end game? And of course, it's not the end game, right? A skill assessment is just the start, right? Your first assessment, the first one that folks take, is the baseline. It tells you where you're at. It tells you where you need to go from here, but it shouldn't be a single event, right? Remember, point A and point B, that whole concept. And with the life cycle of skills being shorter than ever, in fact, some data in some milieux suggest that skills are life cycles are as short as 2 to 3 years. Point B is changing all the time, right? That's that destination we're trying to get to. So again, a skills assessment is just the start, right? It's the start of this ongoing process to drive a culture of learning. And it's that culture of learning that allows you to be agile. Now, when you deploy the approach that Cheryl and I have been discussing, you're going to shift the momentum from push to pull. We mentioned that earlier. People know their gaps and are motivated to close them, but to truly take advantage of the momentum that you're creating, you need to remain learner focused by providing people with exactly what they need without information overload. There was a really interesting study done by some psychologists from Columbia and Stanford universities, and they looked at the consequence of choice. And they did that by doing a jam study where they put in the same market on the same days of the week on successive weeks, a display of 24 jams in one period of time, and then the 6 jams on the same days of the week on another point in time. And while the 24 jams generated more interest, the 6 jams generated more purchases. And that's because people get overwhelmed with choice and they get frozen by that choice. So I thought it's such an interesting study to give us an insight into why it's so critical to provide people just what they need when they need it. So how can we do this? Well, we can do this by providing personalized competency-based learning. That means you're providing a list of specific learning options that are focused solely on closing that individual skill gaps based on their role. That means that you throw out the idea of this, this traditional idea of role-based learning paths where everyone in a role does this same sort of learnings, right? Whether they need it or not. We like this concept of a one-size-fits-me, this learning plan that means this one-size-fits-me concept, and that it's relevant and personalized. And if you remember the Harvard study from earlier we showed, it suggested that aligning learning to skill gaps is what most people felt would make learning more relevant to their job and career goals. Now, some people asked how to convert reluctant learners into engaged learners in the questions in the pre-webinar survey. I think the first question, if you're asking about how do you convert reluctant learners into engaged learners, is why are they reluctant? We have to ask that base question. Could it be that they don't think they need what's being offered? That's certainly what the Forbes article from earlier this year suggests. If they don't see the relevance, they're not going to exert any effort on it. Alternatively, if they think they need it and they pick the activity, you fix the reluctant learner problem. They know what's in it for them. Now, if you want to learn how to create competency-based learnings, use our recorded webinar and step-by-step instructions and templates you can download. It's being, Cheryl's sort of highlighting it there. It's that link on the slides that you'll get after the fact. All right, so great. So let's take this next step, right? Once you got the competency-based learning defined, you're going to need technology in order to scale. And you need this to be automatic to capitalize on that motivation from the assessment results, right? Someone does their assessment, they know what their gaps are, they see their learning behaviors. You need automation to do that. Said another way, right? I see what skill gaps I have, and then I'm instantly presented with what I can do to close them. In fact, what you see on the slide here, and this graphic is available on our website, this is really an elevator pitch that you can provide to leaders when you explain why you need to use this approach to help upskill and reskill your organization, right? This is logical and easy to grasp. And this approach, this personalized competency-based learning, this is where the paradigm starts changing, but only if you can avoid information overload that we just talked about. And only if you can provide the kind of personalized learning modalities that modern learners want, right? It has to be easy to access. It has to be self-directed. and quick to consume in the flow of work.
Yeah, so modern learners, as Tony just mentioned, want to learn in the flow of work at the point of need. If you provide the right learning option, then they can learn while they're working, which eliminates that no time for learning excuse. And this is the most common question that you asked in the survey, is how to get rid of that. So if you're not familiar with the 70-20-10 model, that's where 10% of what we really learn comes from formal activities like courses. 20% is collaborative, that's learning from others like coaching and mentoring, and 70% comes from experience, like on-the-job activities and skill practices, as well as access to learning assets like checklists and job aids and templates. That means 10% of how we learn is formal and 90% is informal. But despite that being how we learn, that's not typically how we provide learning options. Most organizations still provide mostly formal options. In fact, 60% of you said that you don't feel your organization is providing learners with the type of learning that they want and need. So until informal learning represents a larger portion of the personalized learning options being offered, then resistance and the no time for learning excuse is going to continue to be a barrier. Remember, too, that Harvard study that shows that learners want the opportunity to apply what they've learned. So what can you do? You can create learning options where people learn in the flow of work, such as those on-the-job activities with real work, along with things they can use while they're working, job aids, templates, and checklists. You can build skill practices that provide step-by-step instruction for learning some behavior, together with examples, so that when they're done with the skill practice, the actual work is done. According to the LinkedIn Workplace Learning Report, a modern learning experience focuses on creating real behavior change. And specifically, they say that talking about a behavior is not the same as doing the behavior. And that's what makes a skill practice or other workflow learning unique. The learner's actually doing the behavior in the context of their real work over and over again by following structure, whatever structure that high performers have defined. That's how you create one. It's a creative and low-cost way to transfer learning in a short amount of time. And another answer to one of your questions is this type of learning works best across all generations. Want to learn how to do this? Well, you guessed it, we do have resources for that. So down at the bottom, and again, you will be getting a link to this presentation, you can watch our recorded video and download step-by-step instructions, as well as skill practice examples. In particular, skill practices are really the ultimate solution to the question we all ask ourselves, how do you do more with less? And that's because they can be created in about an hour, and they're easy to update when policies or best practices change. So if you want to provide modern learning that drives engagement, then when given a request to create new learning, you want to first ask, what activity could a person perform to learn this skill? And we've done this repeatedly with some of our customers who were trying to create personalized competency-based learning for an area that just didn't have a lot of structure. So rather than identifying a bunch of courses that they needed to create, we held an hour-long meeting with a group of subject matter experts. And then we went through the model task by task and we asked them, okay, how would someone learn how to do this? At the end of the hour, we had specific activities modern learners can do while they work. So remember, first question, what activity could a person perform to learn this skill?
All right, great. So let's transition to that 20% in the 70-20-10 model Cheryl was just discussing. And you know, if you want to provide modern learning that drives engagement, we need to ask, is there anyone in the organization who employees can work with to learn this skill? We know manager engagement is critical to learning transfer on the job, but managers are also strapped for time. Probably especially managers are strapped for time. And frankly, they may not always have the skills themselves, either to demonstrate or to validate the skill of their team member, especially in some technical jobs. That's pretty common. So what can you do, right? I think it's critical to think about the kind of technology that can support the identification of task-based mentors. Traditionally, formal and informal mentoring has been limited to sort of a team or a region or a business unit, right? It's that immediate world you live in your organization. But think of a world where technology can bring your entire organization's skill sets into one ecosystem, and that ecosystem can then be easily mined for the talent you need when you need it. It's really kind of a just enough, just in time mentality. And in that setting, employees who have a skill gap can be easily connected to other employees as a skill-based mentor who excels at that skill, right? To a mentor who can help them in that skill development. If you have the right technology, it can be really easy to make that connection or those connections. And in the future of learning, everyone in the organization should be both teaching and learning on a regular basis. It simply becomes part of the organizational culture. And this is what McKinsey calls modern mentorship, which is an incredibly powerful paradigm. Again, everybody's teaching and learning all the time. So imagine that world, right? Where everyone wants to build capability, not only to do their job, but to build skills in others. In mid-sized to large organizations, technology can facilitate and foster this mentality. And I say mid to large size because smaller organizations probably have the ability to do it more informally. But if you're a mid-sized to large organization, you need technology to facilitate this. It's the only way to do it effectively and efficiently. And in reality, we all do this every day in our personal lives, right? Through social media, which is, connecting with others we find interesting or want to learn from. Why should work and our world of work be any different? And I think really importantly, when mentors are task-based, rather than trying to isolate the individuals who are good at a lot of different things, which tends to be the way we think, but when they're task-based, this is going to dramatically impact the number of potential mentors, and it opens the door for everyone to be a mentor in something. And that's truly engaging, right? That makes people feel good about themselves, that they can help others in the organization. That makes people want to stay in your organization. So again, we're going to come back to the question, what else can we do in facilitating this? And one of the, I think, important things to do is to recognize those who serve as mentors. By recognizing them, others are going to want to be mentors as well. Now I want to transition to learning content for mentoring. And Cheryl already started to touch on this, but we're going to build on this a little bit more. You're still going to create formal learning content for sure. We all need formal learning content, but we want more of that formal content to be micro-learning, right? That's short content that can be easily consumed in bite-sized pieces. Typically, most micro-learning tends to be up to 8 to 10 minutes in length. Longer than that, and it starts to become less effective. The course, the long-form course as we know it today, again, is still going to exist, but I think it needs to be used more sparsely, mostly for the larger, more complex topics, or certainly for introductory information when somebody's new to an industry, or say it's you're training on a new piece of equipment for a technician. They could also be used for soft skills, practicing high-level core skills like negotiation, right? So let's talk about what we can do here in terms of formal learning and micro-learning. So we can look at our formal learning, and we should be looking at it in its constituent parts based on the objectives of that training. And we can see how we can break it into components that can both be used together in that course-like format, but also separately. Let me provoke some thinking with a couple of ideas, right? Ask yourself, can activities that you do, and I'm talking about the activities as a part of classroom training, can those activities be converted into a skill practice that people can do on their own? Or can you extract the videos from an e-learning or classroom courses to demonstrate best practice as a micro-learning? Could they stand alone as their own micro-learning? You'd be shocked at how much informal learning you can create from content you already have simply by breaking it apart. And in fact, we have a video on this, and that actually can teach you how to convert your formal learning into experiential learning. If you haven't accessed this in the past. This is a really good piece of content. And it's simply by, you do this simply by including application and feedback mechanisms. Cheryl walks you through a really excellent process on this. And I think one of the best productivity gainers for learning and development that we can get is by recognizing that you don't have to own everything that your audience needs, right? You could become like a broker or a master of the universe. This is where you're brokering or curating the best internal and external content and resources, things like tools and templates, job aids, right? Ideas for activities, getting all of this really rich content and then curating it against your competency framework. And then when a need arises because of a change in the environment, say there's a new strategic imperative for the corporation, your team will be so capable and responsive that they can provide resources within days to meet the new need, right? It could be something as simple as a link to a YouTube video or industry articles or blog posts, but your team is going to be changing how they think about content and what it means from a learning standpoint. I think the most important thing that we can do is to embrace this concept of curation before building, this curation before building mindset, so that we can be more agile. The key is to understand that we have a lot of content. We have to figure out how to more effectively curate that content.
Okay, so that was focused all on how we're going to drive engagement. Let's transition into being forward-looking. Okay, so we had already talked previously about how employees' top 3 motivations to learn are all connected to careers. Career development is consistently in the top 2 reasons people take a job and the top 2 reasons people leave when they don't exist. According to both Burson Research and Glassdoor data, career development and learning are almost twice as important as compensation, benefits, and work environment. And quite simply, the old strategy for career planning, it just doesn't work. You know, think about it, having somebody go and talk to someone in HR about their career path, or looking at a career path diagram. Today, a career is more a lattice, like a rock climbing wall almost, than a ladder. There really is no career path any longer. Anyone can go anywhere. Jobs that were part of career paths are going away. Organizations are becoming more flat. And according to the Institute for the Future, a whole 85% of jobs that will exist in 2030 haven't even been invented yet. So luckily, the same strategy that we presented for being learner-focused and embracing modern learning options apply to career planning and growth. So it's still about knowing what tasks and skills you need to do in the future, comparing yourself to them with a competency assessment, and then being presented with personalized competency-based learning that you can do while you work to help you close any gaps and prepare for that future role. We're supposed to help people grow into other roles. And that means we need to help them explore other roles at their leisure, and once again, in an agile way. So today, they might consider a data scientist role, and then in 6 months, they may focus on being a program manager. For anyone who ever played dress up in different uniforms when you were younger, this is kind of similar. You assess your capabilities against these different jobs and see which one fits best. Now, 2 interesting things happen. Number 1, people might find that they have skills for a role that they never thought that they would be suited for. Especially when people who are in jobs that are going away, when they start to assess against new jobs, they might have some eye-opening moments. For example, people who demonstrate curiosity, persistence, and drive for continuous learning might find themselves well suited to jobs like cybersecurity. Or people who have great analytical and problem-solving skills might make great software coders. And the second thing that will happen is that people start to take ownership of their future, something that millennials and Gen Z are really passionate about. For them, there's no, okay, wait until you've been with a company for 3 years and then you can maybe ask for promotion. That doesn't fly with them. Rather, it's show me what I've got to do to learn the next thing, and I'll go do it. They understand that skills are currency and that they can take those skills to any other job inside the company or outside. And when they career assess, identify skill gaps, and see learning options for those other roles, then they can self-develop or request the opportunity for activities and experiences that will help them to get there. So give them control and they'll be engaged. Give them the opportunity to grow internally and they're more likely to stay. It's just logical. So if you want to be forward-thinking or forward-looking, you need to use skills assessment and personalized competency-based learning to support career planning and growth. And remember that this helps their managers to drive career goals for their team.
Great. You know, be curious is such a big component of being learner-centric that we wanted to call it out separately. So let's unpack this concept a little bit. Remember how we said that the shelf life of a skill is dropping rapidly, right? Well, a competency model describes what people need to be able to do in their role to achieve their part of corporate strategy. And while strategy may not change all that often, the behaviors that make someone great at the tasks and skills in their job does change. This could be reflected in the process and tools and technologies and also best practices, right? What is best changes all the time in a dynamic marketplace. So remember that competency models help L&D, our learning and development, know how to serve their learner customers. And we have to ask ourselves again the question, what can we do? If you want to ensure that your role-based competency models are current, you need to get curious and start to explore your organization's business and in the industry and the audience you serve, both the internal and external audiences, not because you have to create content, but rather to be intimately familiar with your customer, maybe even knowing what the customer needs before they know it exists. Then you'll know what activities or materials already exist or need to be created for competency-based learning, and you can quickly pivot to meet any kind of changing needs. Consultants do this all the time, right? They're looking into the future and helping customers anticipate what they need next, and that's what we need to do as L&D leaders, to be able to anticipate. So we need to move from being reactive to proactive, right? From tactical to strategic. Frankly, from a cost center to a value delivery mechanism. That truly ensures that we're helping to achieve the corporate strategy. And the goal is not just to execute against corporate strategy, but to be a voice in developing corporate strategy. So let's say your industry is facing major regulatory scrutiny, and peer companies are being fined in the hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars. The board and the executive team are going to know that the company needs to be proactive, but how can learning and development help? Imagine inserting into your competency models the expectation for the job that all employees will abide by specific elements from the company's code of conduct. This both helps you build awareness of the expectations and a culture of compliance, as well as provides a legally defensible position should your company be audited. I'm telling you, your legal and compliance team are going to love you for this. And I think this could be an incredible win and shows how L&D can truly partner with the board in solving against these types of challenges. And that's just one of many types of examples. You know, often when I bring this up, people aren't sure what to do. So maybe we could take 1 minute and share some practical ways, share with each other some practical ways that we can learn about our business or the industry or our audience. If you could just take a minute, think about the question, how do you know what's coming next so you can be prepared? How do you know what's next so you can be prepared? If you could just chat your answers, and then we'll share those and maybe learn from each other. So again, how do you know what's coming next to be prepared? Some of the things to consider are reading your own company's annual report, reading competitors' annual reports, listening to earnings and analyst reports for the quarterly reportings, doing industry research, setting up Google alerts, having subscriptions to industry to industry publications. It's so important that building your knowledge will allow you to participate more effectively. If you're not already being invited to or participating in regional or departmental or even corporate strategy meetings, having that knowledge will facilitate that. It'll allow you to have a conversation that helps you become more part of the solution, part of the strategic process, versus just a recipient of the strategy that needs to execute. Hopefully these gives you some good ideas, right, on how to be curious about your organization and your audience, so you can know their needs even before they do. And I'll close by repeating, it's critical to be curious if L&D is going to play the kind of role it should be and deserves to be in developing corporate strategy.
Thanks, and it's funny because again, a lot of times the expectation is I'll get that internally and it will be provided to me. So the be curious is about flipping that and saying, why wait? Let me go out and find out what's going on in the world. And if internally they don't necessarily, or you don't feel like they know enough, maybe you can be educating them. And again, that brings you to the strategy table. So it's a good segue to where we are here, which is that several people asked about how to build strong relationships with departments of modern learners, or how to become a trusted advisor. And so this is really how you do it, is you be curious. You can't advise departments that you serve if you don't really know them. And if you're only using internal information, then there's nothing, then everybody knows the same information you do and you're not advising them on anything. Additionally, if they see that you understand their business objectives and the environment in which they work, and you're providing activities that are going to help them to achieve their goals, then you are slowly going to start to move into that trusted advisor role. Now, as an added bonus for participating today, we're going to provide you with a link to a skill practice that you can use for yourself to learn how to become a trusted partner. And this skill practice helps you to create specific messaging that creates, a sense of urgency around why now. It connects achievement of a stakeholder's goals to the program or the activity that you're proposing. And actually, this link that will give you not only this skill practice, but also 2 others that might be useful, which will help you to build credibility and an opportunity to help a customer. So hopefully those are useful.
So if you let people self-assess and provide personalized competency-based learning, learners will own their development and hold themselves accountable, right? The learning organization will exist to make this possible, not push it down their throats. So again, what can we do? See what choices learners are making and work to increase those types of learning options and keep them current. That's one of the best advantages of having the right technologies. You can actually start to measure what's working on what people are using. We should stop creating content that may be quickly obsolete, right? L&D will have to be highly responsive and able to pivot quickly. And then we need to look at learning curation and agile content development approaches that are radically different than traditional ones. Some of the things that we've already been talking about.
Okay, so back to our point A to point B analogy. So here's a diagram that shows the continuous process. The assessment is where I identify where I am now. That's at point A. And how far away I am from point B. So next, I review the personalized options that help me to get from A to B. Think of it like Google Maps, where it shows you different ways to get from place to place. Then I select one step in the path, the first step in my journey. This is my development activity plan for the next month, and I execute it. And I might plan and execute several steps along the journey, one each month so it's manageable. Periodically, I need to check my progress. Am I closer? And as Tony mentioned earlier, given that skills change quickly, and unlike a map destination, point B may have changed or moved. So where do I stand now? What you've done is you've raised awareness in people of their own skill gaps, intrinsically motivated each person to close them, and now you give them specific ways to do so. And so you want that assessment technology to facilitate scale that you can do this for thousands of employees working at their own pace over and over as skills change and corporate strategy changes. This cycle can't stop. It's continuous. Upskilling, if an individual decides that continuous learning, upskilling, reskilling, that's not for me, well, they might as well kiss their career goodbye, because this is simply the world we live in now. And we as learning professionals need to ensure that we create and our leaders embrace a culture of learning. And in order to do that, to support it, we have to provide modern learning that people want and need.
And one of the great things about going through this process is that once you've collected, you've done the assessments, for example, you have this aggregated assessment data, and you know where aggregated skill gaps exist. This enables you to be learner focused, right? While each person can be engaged in helping themselves, you have strategic direction on how to help the organization meet their goals. I just actually commented in the chat to Polly, because I think this speaks right to the question, Polly, or the comment that you made about at your NGO, the leadership lack of strategic direction. The point is that aggregated personalized learning data becomes real needs assessment data for demand planning. And when skill assessments occur over time, you can measure the impact of your skill development activities. Just like for the learner, right? While the finish line may look different each time, you'll always know where you are and what you need to do to get to your ultimate goal to serve your internal and external customers. And as the organization's strategy changes, of course, in addition to the skills required to execute, the role-based competency model skills can be adjusted so that the cycle is always moving everyone to a new destination. As we've said, point B is not static. It's that ever-changing point on the strategic direction the company's going. You can do this easily with annual or biannual review of the competency model with high performers in the role. And the point there is you're identifying what you need to be able to do in order to achieve the new objectives. And we describe this in really great detail in some of the competency model creation materials that we mentioned earlier that will be available for download. Over time, this enables you to measure the impact of the learning, and you're also measuring what you bring to the organization as an L&D function. Now, several people asked how to change the corporate mindset about the value of training. This is how you do it.
And Tony, don't call it training, because we always say that training is what you do to someone, but learning is what they do for themselves. So it's kind of nice to have that little distinction that you can bring up when you hear that in your organizations. So today we talked about how to boost employee satisfaction through a modern learning approach that recognizes the importance of career growth. You can do that by being learner-focused, driving engagement, being forward-looking, and being curious. So starting with learner-focused. If you want to be learner-focused, you need to know each learner's skill gaps. That requires each person to perform a skill assessment against a role-based competency model, and then be presented with relevant, personalized competency-based learning. People want to be great at their jobs. They want to close their skill gaps, and they're going to be motivated to close them when they know that they have them. Drive engagement. Actually engaging with the learning requires that they be the kind of learning that the modern learner wants. Not too much, just the right relevant recommendations. One size fits me. So no overload that Tony was talking about with the jam. Lots of informal learning content that is self-directed, quick to consume in the flow of work, which will overcome that no time for learning and also support actually application on the job. Forward-looking. People want to control, and they want control over their future. You have to be forward-looking and support career planning and growth. Because remember, your job description doesn't stop with helping people have the skills to do their current job. It's also about helping them to grow into other roles. So use the same techniques that we described and technology for helping people to identify and close skill gaps for their current role in order to help them to identify and close skill gaps for future ones. and you want to promote it. You want to recognize it, and you want to encourage managers to embrace it. And lastly, be curious. Remember that your role is becoming more and more important because skills are changing rapidly, and skill gaps threaten the very existence of many organizations. You want to be curious and get to know your business, your industry, and your audience so that you can proactively serve them with what you know they need.
All right, so someone asked for the next best first step after the webcast. We always ask that question, right? What should I do on tomorrow? And I think throughout the session, we've tried to provide the sort of what you should do comments, but one easy first step, and this is the first step, is to create 1 to 5 informal learning activities like a skill practice. And remember, there's a whole webinar on this if you want to get into this. Importantly, there's no cost other than your time, right? So you really don't probably need approval, even if you're not a manager. Even your first one will probably take you only an hour or so, but certainly less than a day. Once you've built these 1 to 5 skill practices, you can promote them to the target audience. And it's important to try to get some influencers to really try them out. Get testimonials from those who use them, and then use those testimonials to market those skill practices to others. Then you use the feedback to start changing the conversation with leaders about a better way to support modern learners. But the idea here is to start with something very practical and doable that's very low cost and low effort, and then build into this strategic shift.
And others asked about how to sell the problem and the solution to leaders so that they buy into this different approach. That also fed into one of your top challenges in our poll. So the recommendation we have is to start with this elevator pitch. And on our summary slide, we're going to have a link to this that you can download it. And that explains just how to upskill and reskill. In fact, when you look at it, it's difficult to see how you could upskill and reskill without this approach. So here's what we want you to do. We want you to ask them, if our competitors are using this approach, what's going to happen if we don't? What happens if they change, our competitors, but we don't? What happens if our competitors are supporting career growth of their people, but we keep using old approaches? How will we satisfy and retain our best people?
So we started this webinar with a whole bunch of data points from different sources, credible sources. And when it comes to selling leadership on informal learning, we really need to start by using data to support our position on what modern learners want, and then show that informal learning can be built quickly, that it's easy to maintain, that it costs less, that it doesn't take people away from their jobs. It enables them to execute what you need them to do by building the right habits and skills, which again, is the exact way people want to learn. We ultimately need to convey that that formal learning is not the right strategy, that informal learning is the right strategy.
Thanks, Tony. Okay, so here's a recap of the links that we mentioned earlier, and you should be able to see that on your screen now. In the top right, you can see that there is a QR code so that you can download the PowerPoint right now. But you also see a number of the materials. So somebody asked in the chat about the link for the informal learning. That's this one right here. This is just, again, a recap. This is that infographic is here. So there's a number of different ways, different things. I'll leave this up on the screen for a second while we get into some of the questions that we had asked. So Tony, let's why don't we dig into those questions? So the first one was, what learning technologies support modern learning approaches? Tony, you want me to start there?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Go for it, Cheryl, and I'll add on if there's anything to add.
Perfect. Okay, so during our session, we talked about the types of features that you need from those technologies. And while several systems have these features, we do provide one of them called the Self-Directed Learning Engine. And if you're interested in that, you can contact us after the session, and we'll be happy to provide you with more information. Tony, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, most organizations have made investments in their L&D tech stack and HR tech stack and their talent management system and their learning management system. What we're trying to do at SkillDirector with the Self-Directed Learning Engine is sit in between that, because none of the current the main systems out there are doing everything that we've talked about. So again, if you're interested, as Cheryl mentioned, we're happy to share some more about how we think about this and how we're trying to execute this with our clients.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. So next question. Somebody made mention of the fact that I sometimes talk to participants who say they want personalized training, but still don't really want to take the lead in their professional development and would prefer a structured training calendar. Are there any approaches that you have for dealing with this? And it's, you know, it is a sort of a tough question. What I would say is, if they say that they want it, but they don't really do it, do they really want it? Are they just really looking for an excuse? And we kind of go back to adult learning theory, right? So when you're in elementary school, you need to be told you got to go to math, you got to go to science class. But when you're adult, you know, assuming that you're presented with personalized learning options and you aren't left to just sort of wing it on your own, then you should be able to self-select what you want and need. And if you have to be told what to do, I kind of hate to say it this way, but, you know, what does that say about the role, the job that you're in? If you have to be told what to do for learning, do you have to be told what to do in your job as well? And I do understand that if you don't have a bunch of options easily available, then you can create a structured training calendar. But if you do have these options, then the structured training calendar is actually a really big waste of company funds, because you have to plan to deliver content that nobody may need or want. So I'm going to give you an example. We had a customer who saved $250,000, that's $250,000, per class that they were offering. And they did have people who were attending it, but nobody really needed it because it wasn't driven based on assessments. It was just, well, we're offering it, so I'm going to go. So when they shifted to personalized learning, they saved a fortune. Tony, what else would you add there?
Yeah, and you know, a couple things. So you could still continue, if you had to have a training calendar, you can still tie that to the personalized approach by tying it into the skill assessment, so that only, you know, people who have that gap are seeing that as one of their learning options. The other thing that you can do is you can take that and convert it to electronic learning, to e-learning, and as we talked about in the webinar, break it down into small pieces, and importantly, tie it to a skill practice of some kind. Make it practical so that the learning goes beyond the formal into the experiential and the flow of work. So those are some other things that you can do to sort of, in this transition away from that more traditional approach.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tony. Okay, so the next question was, when it's time to promote someone, how do we assess his or her competency? Is that based on future position or current potential? So I would say there's a mix. So you use the career assessment that we've been talking about to help somebody to see what gaps they have and to develop those new skills for that future position in order to prepare them for success. I'd also add that learning agility, which is their ability to continuously learn, their desire and ability to continuously learn, is a leading indicator of success in most new roles. Right? If the person doesn't show desire to develop in their current job, they don't have all the skills for their next role, what makes you think that they're going to do what it takes? But I also want to add one funny story. I just saw a LinkedIn video that Mark Cuban, who is a famous entrepreneur and Shark Tank participant, he was asked this very question. He was asked, do you hire someone based on their skill or based on potential? And his answer was, everyone has potential. So he said, I'd pick skill over potential. assuming you can find candidates that possess the skills. But not everybody has all the skills, so sometimes you use potential and that learning agility. Tony, what else would you add?
And Cheryl, if you could pop up, if you can see in the chat, Polly asked if you can put the bit.ly link back up so she can, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, and this is a challenge companies are facing all the time, especially with the shortage of talent. Do you hire, and I'll take it to hiring versus just promoting. And so the question is, do you have to, do you wait to hire someone who has all the requisite skills, or do you hire someone with 80% and then upskill them in the last 20% or 70-30? You could do the same thing with promotions. The fact is, it's so hard to find that perfect candidate, that purple squirrel. It's nearly impossible. So the goal is to find people who are close and, importantly, who have learning agility, who have the aptitude and the desire to learn. And again, having a program like this actually helps you see, when you're evaluating different candidates, who is more likely to build the skills. And if you've seen that they've shown learning agility through constant upskilling, that should be a good indicator on who to promote as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tony. So we're at the top of the hour, and I want to thank you all for attending. We have a couple of other questions that were not yet answered, but what we're going to do is at the bottom link is the LinkedIn group, Competency Models for Upskilling and Reskilling, and we will post the answer to those questions there so that they can be shared by everybody. Hannah will also be sending out a link to download the presentation if you missed the QR code so that you can get all of these links. So thank you all so much for attending today. We really appreciated it.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Thanks, Cheryl.
Hope it helps.
All right.